Hulk Hogan is dead, and with him, something else just died too. Something bigger than the man, the brand, or the bandana. Because the truth is, wrestling was never just fake. It was a lie, a beautifully staged lie hiding one of the dirtiest entertainment machines in American history. And what you're about to learn isn't in any Hall of Fame induction speech. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you might never look at wrestling or power the same way again. Let's start with the scandal you think you know. In 2016, Hulk Hogan took down an entire media company. Gawker published his sex tape. But it wasn't just the moaning that made headlines. It was the racial slurs. It was the fact that this all unraveled the superhero facade. The man who told kids to eat their vitamins and say their prayers was now the villain in his own story. But here's the twist. Hogan didn't just sue. He destroyed Gawker with a little help from a secret billionaire, Peter Thiel. It was one of the biggest takedowns of press freedom in U.S. history. And Hogan? He walked away with $140 million and a weird new redemption arc. But that's not why we're here, because what really matters is what was never brought to court. Before the lawsuits, before the deaths, before the billion-dollar stock options, wrestling was just magic. At least that's what we were told. For millions of kids growing up in the 80s and 90s, Hulk Hogan wasn't just a wrestler. He was a father figure with muscles. He was Captain America. If Captain America screamed brother and tore his shirt in half, he had a Saturday morning cartoon, his own action figure line, workout tapes, and a pasta restaurant called Pastamania. No, really. The WWE, then WWF, didn't just dominate TV screens. It embedded itself in childhood nostalgia, breakfast cereals, and plastic lunch boxes. And while Hogan body-slammed evil foreigners in the ring, Vince McMahon was body-slamming the competition behind the scenes. He turned regional wrestling into a global brand, bought out local territories, sued anyone who tried to copy. The goal? Total domination. Then came WrestleMania, the Super Bowl of scripted violence, a spectacle of neon lights, fake rivalries, and real bruises. They brought in celebrities, MTV, Mr. T, and suddenly wrestling was cool again, or at least it sold like it was. But what the audience didn't see was the cost. Wrestlers had grueling schedules, 300-plus days a year, no off-season, no real health checks. They were traveling circus performers with no union, no leverage, and no one watching their backs. Except the fans, of course, who cheered when their hero limped through the ropes for the third match of the week. Because if he could still walk, it wasn't real pain, right? And Hogan? He wasn't just a performer. He was the brand. If Hulk didn't like you backstage, your push was over. If he liked you, welcome to WrestleMania. He played politics like he played matches, with big moves and bigger ego. There were other stars, sure. Macho Man, Ultimate Warrior, but no one had the backstage stroke Hogan had. He negotiated outcomes, titles, even who got to speak in interviews. Yes, creative control, meaning Hogan could rewrite the script if he didn't like losing. And if you think this was just an act, ask Bret Hart, the guy who got double-crossed in real life, live on pay-per-view. That wasn't kayfabe, that was betrayal, and it proved one thing. Wrestling might be fake, but the power struggles were very, very real. As wrestling evolved into the Attitude Era, more violence, more skin, more everything, the cracks got harder to ignore. But by then it was too late. Wrestling had already become a religion, and Hogan, he was its prophet, or maybe just its best-paid preacher. The deeper you go into wrestling, the less it looks like a sport, and more like a war zone with entrance music. Behind the glam and pyro, the truth was uglier than a steel cage match. Most wrestlers in the 80s and 90s didn't have doctors. They had drug dealers, dressed as trainers. Vicodin, Percocet, Soma, Xanax, steroids, sleeping pills. If it numbed the body or the brain, it was fair game. Guys were on the road 300 days a year. No health insurance, no safety checks, just walk it off and tape it up. You weren't allowed to get injured. That's what losers did. It wasn't just the physical damage. It was the head trauma, the paranoia, the isolation, multiple concussions per week, undiagnosed CTE, addiction, depression, suicidal thoughts. But mental health didn't sell tickets, so it was treated like the worst gimmick of all, weakness. Chris Benoit was one of the best technical wrestlers alive, trained in Japan, respected by everyone, and then, overnight, his name vanished. No mention, no memorial, no history. Because in June 2007, he murdered his wife, his 7-year-old son, then himself. The media called it roid rage. WWE distanced itself immediately, but the truth was darker. When his brain was autopsied, doctors said it looked like that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. The man literally forgot how to be human. He had over 20 documented concussions. WWE had documented 0. And while his actions were inexcusable, his death revealed something terrifying. The ring was eating people alive, and no one was stopping it. Former wrestlers who spoke out were blacklisted, labeled bitter, unhireable, liabilities. Quote on screen from Justin Roberts, "If you weren't valuable anymore, you were nothing." Some ended up broke, homeless, addicted, or dead. Quote from Kamala, "They used me until I couldn't walk, then they forgot my name." And this isn't just about Hulk Hogan, but let's be honest, he wasn't innocent. He thrived in the system. He benefited from silence. He turned down interviews about Benoit, defended Vince McMahon, and when confronted about the damage wrestling caused, he danced around it because the spotlight was more important than the truth. Let's read a few names, shall we? Eddie Guerrero, heart failure at 38. Umaga, heart attack at 36. Test, overdose at 33. Miss Elizabeth, overdose at 42. China, multiple substances at 46. Owen Hart, fell to his death during a stunt at 34. Brian Pillman, heart attack at 35. The British Bulldog, heart failure at 39. This isn't a list, it's a graveyard built on applause. And the system that enabled it, still on air, still selling tickets. You've seen the bodies, you've heard the silence. Now let's talk about the machine behind it all. Independent contractor, the greatest work of fiction in wrestling. WWE calls its wrestlers independent contractors. Sounds empowering, right? Spoiler, it's not. In reality, it means no benefits, no health care, no job security, no right to unionize, and no control over your own name. Imagine being world famous under a name you don't own. You leave WWE and suddenly you're legally not yourself anymore. Quote from John Moxley, "You're expected to give everything, and they give you an exit." Since going public in 1999, WWE evolved from fake sport to real corporation. But while the packaging changed, the exploitation stayed the same. And no one held more strings than Vince McMahon, the chairman, CEO, and real-life Bond villain in a tight black t-shirt. Vince controlled everything. Match outcomes, storylines, who gets pushed, who disappears, who gets buried. Literally and metaphorically. He even approved the commentary. Every word in that headset, scripted by Vince in real time. Wrestlers weren't athletes. They were assets. Disposable, brandable, replaceable. Let's not forget how WWE treated its female talent for decades. Women weren't booked. They were paraded. Their segments? Bra and panties matches, slap fights, cat fights and pudding. They were called divas, not athletes. Had their own butterfly-shaped belt, because nothing screams legitimacy like a glittery cartoon title. Only in the last 10 years, when sponsors demanded it, did WWE begin its so-called women's revolution. Translation, and even then, guess who took credit for it? Yep, Vince. The WWE Machine isn't just about fighting. It's about conditioning. Merchandise is pushed harder than morals. Heel turns are corporate strategy, and the illusion of free choice, carefully managed chaos. You enter the system full of dreams. You exit with injuries, lawsuits, and maybe a podcast. In 2022, Vince McMahon stepped down as WWE CEO after reports emerged that he paid over $12 million in hush money to cover up sexual misconduct. But just months later, he returned to power. Unapologetic, untouchable. Because in WWE, the only thing stronger than a finishing move is a short memory. And as long as the crowd chants loud enough, the past stays muted. For years, WWE was the only game in town. They absorbed competition, buried rival shows, controlled cable time slots. If you wanted to make it big, you had to go through the machine. There was no independent scene. It was WWE, or obscurity. Now, with AEW rising, some wrestlers finally have options. But after 40 years of monopoly, the damage has already been done. Yes, WWE now runs mental health campaigns. The same company that called depression bad attitude in the 90s. Yes, they push diversity, unless you count the decades of racist stereotypes and gimmicks. Yes, they promote wellness, but still call their wrestlers independent contractors to avoid paying for broken spines. You want fallout? Here's fallout. A study once showed that over 40% of pro wrestlers from the 80s and 90s died before hitting 50. Heart attacks, overdoses, suicide. Guys like Eddie Guerrero, Umaga, Test, Miss Elizabeth, gone too early. All while WWE grew richer. When CM Punk tried to speak out about infections, botched care, mental burnout, he got fired on his wedding day. And Hogan? After his racism scandal, he got canceled, then uncanceled, then reinducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Because if you're marketable enough, even racism has a second act. So yeah, Hulk Hogan is dead. But what really died was the illusion. That wrestling was just show, that pain wasn't real, that these men and women were just characters, not human beings. WWE made billions selling heroes, but behind every cheer was someone suffering in silence. What do you think? Should WWE be held accountable? Is it too late for justice? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Smash that like button if you think power should come with consequences.